My husband pulled me along to the charity gala for one reason only, to impress the company's new owner. "Stay out of sight," he muttered sharply. "That dress is humiliating." When the billionaire finally arrived, he brushed past my husband's extended hand without a glance. Instead, he came straight toward me. He gently took my hands, his eyes filling with tears, and whispered, "I've been searching for you for 30 years. I never stopped loving you." The crystal glass slipped from my husband's fingers and shattered on the marble floor. I should have realized something was wrong the moment Victor insisted I attend the corporate gala with him. In our 25 years of marriage, he had never once wanted me beside him at any professional event. I was the invisible wife, the one who stayed home, spoke softly, and made sure his shirts were ironed and his dinners warm when he returned from meetings with powerful people. "You're coming with me tonight," he declared one Tuesday morning, eyes fixed on his financial newspaper. "The new CEO will be there. Blackstone Holdings was just acquired, and I need to make a strong impression." I froze mid-pour as I refilled his coffee, the liquid trembling in the pot. "Are you sure you want me there?" I asked quietly. "I don't really have anything suitable for such a formal event." Victor finally looked up, his pale eyes filled with familiar contempt. "Figure something out, buy something inexpensive if you must, just don't humiliate me." "Don't humiliate me." Those words had echoed through my marriage for more than 2 decades. "Don't embarrass me by talking too much. Don't embarrass me by mentioning where you came from. Don't embarrass me by existing too openly in places you don't belong." That week, I searched thrift stores and clearance racks using the $200 Victor allowed me each month for personal needs. Everything came from that small amount: clothes, toiletries, even the modest gifts I bought for his colleagues' wives during holidays. After 25 years, I had mastered the art of looking presentable for next to nothing. The dress I finally found was navy blue, long-sleeved, simple yet refined. It cost $45 at a consignment boutique, and the shop owner assured me it had originally come from an upscale retailer. I pressed it carefully and tucked it into the back of my closet, trying not to imagine the criticism Victor would surely find. The evening of the gala arrived too quickly. Victor stepped out of the dressing room in a flawlessly tailored black tuxedo that likely cost more than my entire yearly wardrobe. His silver-streaked hair was neatly slicked back, and on his wrist gleamed his father's gold watch, a subtle reminder of inherited status, despite his company's growing financial troubles. "Are you ready?" he asked, then stopped cold when he saw me. His expression darkened instantly. "That's what you're wearing." I glanced down at my dress. What had felt graceful in the store suddenly seemed dull and outdated beneath his gaze. "I thought it looked nice," I said softly. "It's the best I could manage with the budget you gave me." Victor scoffed. "It'll have to do, just stay in the background tonight." "Don't draw attention to yourself," Victor warned sharply. "And for heaven's sake, don't talk about anything personal. These people are serious professionals." The drive to the Grand Regent Hotel downtown passed in heavy silence, broken only by the classical music Victor preferred, and the faint tapping of his fingers as he checked his phone repeatedly. I sat beside him, hands folded neatly in my lap, my fingers unconsciously brushing the small silver locket resting against my collarbone. It was the only piece of jewelry I owned that Victor hadn't given me, the only thing that truly belonged to me. I had worn it every day for 30 years, always hidden beneath my clothes, always unseen. The hotel ballroom looked exactly as I had imagined. Glittering chandeliers hung overhead, round tables were dressed in crisp white linens, and the room was filled with people who measured success through investment portfolios and luxury homes. The air carried the heavy scent of designer perfume mixed with fresh lilies. Everywhere I looked, women wore gowns that likely cost more than our monthly mortgage. "Stand here," Victor ordered, pointing toward a dim corner near the bar where tall decorative plants cast deep shadows. "I need to speak with some people. Don't wander." I nodded silently and watched him walk away, his posture stiff with forced confidence. I knew the truth about his business. I heard the hushed phone calls late at night, the anxious discussions about unpaid loans, looming deadlines, and clients walking away. This gala was his last attempt to rescue what little he had left, to secure connections that might keep him from financial ruin. I stayed where he left me, sipping a glass of water while observing the crowd. Executives laughed a little too loudly at one another's jokes. Their wives compared jewelry collections and upcoming vacations. Everyone appeared certain of their place in the room, everyone except me, standing like a ghost in my $45 dress. Nearly 20 minutes passed before I spotted Victor again across the ballroom, animatedly gesturing as he spoke to a cluster of men in expensive suits. His face was flushed, his movements frantic. Even from a distance I could sense his desperation. Whatever pitch he was making, it clearly wasn't landing. Then the atmosphere in the room changed. Voices softened, conversations paused, heads turned toward the main entrance. I leaned forward instinctively, trying to see what had drawn everyone's attention, and my breath caught painfully in my chest. A tall man stepped into the ballroom, dressed in a flawlessly tailored tuxedo. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and he moved with a calm authority that came only from real power, not the strained imitation of it. There was something unmistakably familiar about the way he walked, something that made my heart stumble in a way it hadn't in decades. "That's him," someone whispered nearby. "That's Adrian Cole, the new CEO. Adrian." The name struck me like a physical blow. It couldn't be. After 30 years it simply couldn't be him. But when he turned slightly, scanning the room with those dark, searching eyes I knew so well, certainty crashed over me. It was Adrian Cole, the man I had loved with every part of my soul at 22. The man whose child I had carried for 3 months before losing everything. The man I had been forced to leave behind, abandoning my heart in that small college town where we had once planned our entire future. He was older now, refined in a way that spoke of success and authority, yet his face was unchanged. The strong jawline, the piercing eyes that seemed to look straight through people, the slight tilt of his head when he was deep in thought. My Adrian's. No longer mine, and not mine for 30 long years. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, my heart racing so violently I was certain others could hear it. Why was he here, and how was it possible that he was the very man Victor was desperate to impress? Across the ballroom, Victor caught sight of Adrian and immediately began forcing his way through the crowd. Panic tightened my chest as I watched my husband approach the one man I had never truly stopped loving, his hand already stretched forward in a confident business greeting, his smile sharp and calculating. Adrian accepted the handshake with polite restraint, but even from where I stood, it was clear he wasn't paying attention to a single word Victor was saying. His gaze kept drifting past him, sweeping the room as if he were searching for something or someone. Then it happened. As though pulled by an unseen force, his eyes locked onto mine. Everything froze. For a suspended moment that felt endless, Adrian Cole stared straight at me across the crowded ballroom. All colour drained from his face, his lips parting slightly in disbelief. The powerful executive mask shattered, and for one fragile heartbeat, he was 25 again, looking at me the same way he had when we were young and foolish enough to believe love could overcome anything. Then he moved. He walked directly toward me, as if the 100 people between us simply didn't exist. Victor continued talking for several seconds before realizing Adrian was no longer listening. I saw confusion flicker across my husband's face, quickly turning to alarm as he followed Adrian's line of sight, and understood that he was heading straight for me. "Excuse me," Adrian said calmly without sparing Victor a glance. His voice was deeper now, textured by years and success, yet it still made my knees weaken. "I need to speak with your wife," Victor stammered, insisting there must be some misunderstanding. That I was no one important, that Adrian had the wrong person, but Adrian didn't hear him. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could catch the scent of his cologne, expensive, refined, nothing like the familiar aftershave he used to wear back in college. "Marine," he said softly. Hearing my name on his lips after 30 years shattered the walls I had built so carefully. Tears burned my eyes before I could stop them. "Adrian," I whispered, my voice barely there. Without hesitation, he took both my hands in his just as he used to when we were young. His grip was steady, warm. I noticed his left hand instinctively. His ring finger was bare. "I've been searching for you for 30 years, he said, emotion thickening his voice. His dark eyes glistened, and when he spoke again, his words echoed through the suddenly silent room. "I still love you." The sharp crack of Victor's champagne glass hitting the marble floor, cut through the stunned quiet like a gunshot. Adrian's confession lingered between us, fragile and powerful all at once, a bridge I wasn't sure I had the courage to cross. Around us, the gala had effectively come to a standstill. Conversations halted mid-sentence as some of the city's most influential figures stared openly at the scene unfolding. I could feel their curiosity pressing in from all sides, yet all I could see was Adrian's face, older, marked by time, but undeniably the man I had loved. "This is absurd." Victor's voice sliced through the moment. He stepped between us, his face flushed with fury and humiliation. "Marine, what is going on here?" I tried to speak. No words came. How could I possibly explain 30 years of buried pain in front of a room full of strangers? How could I ever tell my husband that he had never been more than a shelter, a place to hide after losing the only man I had ever truly loved? Adrian never looked away from me. "May we speak in private?" he asked quietly. His tone was gentle yet carried the natural authority of someone used to being obeyed. Victor let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Private, she's my wife. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of me." "No," Adrian replied simply, "I can't." The intensity of his gaze was almost too much to bear. In his eyes I saw questions left unanswered, pain that time had failed to erase, and a love that had somehow survived 3 long decades apart. But I also saw Victor's fear, the subtle tremor in his hands as he realized his carefully orchestrated evening was collapsing. "Adrian," I finally managed, my voice barely audible. "I can't, not here, not like this." He nodded slowly, understanding in a way Victor never had. "Of course." Then softly, "Marine." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, simple white, edged with silver lettering. "Please call me," he said. "We need to talk." I accepted the card with unsteady fingers. Our hands brushed for just a second, but the contact sent a jolt through me, a reminder of what it felt like to be touched with tenderness rather than control. "We're leaving," Victor snapped, his voice loud enough to draw attention as he gripped my arm painfully. Adrian's expression darkened instantly when he saw Victor's hand on me. For a brief moment I thought he might step in. I shook my head slightly, and with visible effort he stepped back, his jaw tight. "I'll be waiting for your call," he said quietly. Victor pulled me through the ballroom, past curious stares and whispered assumptions. I clutched Adrian's card in my free hand, the sharp edges pressing into my palm like an anchor. The drive home was a blur of Victor's anger and accusations, but his words barely registered. My thoughts were already drifting backward through time, to a small college town where I had once been young, fearless, and hopelessly in love. Adrian and I met during our junior year at Ridgeway University. I was majoring in literature on a partial scholarship, juggling 3 jobs to cover what financial aid didn't. Adrian was a business student, brilliant, driven, and unexpectedly kind. Men from wealthy families weren't supposed to notice girls like me, but Adrian did. Our first real conversation happened in the library during finals week. I was sprawled across several chairs, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups when he approached, his head tilted slightly, the way it always was when he was thinking. "You look like you could use a proper meal," he said with a quiet smile. "The cafeteria closes in 20 minutes, but I know a place that's open all night, best pie in town." I glanced up from my literature book, already preparing a polite refusal. I didn't have money for late-night food, and I didn't have time for whatever game wealthy boys played with girls like me. "I can't afford diners," I said honestly, "but thank you." He didn't look offended, he only smiled gently. "I didn't ask if you could afford it," he said. "I asked if you were hungry." That was Adrian, straightforward, sincere, never hiding behind appearances. He had a way of cutting through everything unnecessary and going straight to what truly mattered. We went to that diner together that night. He ordered apple pie for me and sat across the table, listening while I talked about books, hopes, and the scholarship I was fighting desperately to keep. He didn't try to impress me with talk of wealth or future success. He didn't boast about his family or his ambitions. He simply listened. Really listened, in a way no one ever had before. After that we became inseparable. Adrian welcomed me into his world of cocktail receptions and country clubs, but he also slipped away from those polished spaces to join me in mine, Late-night study sessions, shared pizza slices in cramped dorm rooms, quiet laughter over borrowed textbooks. We talked about everything: literature and finance, family and fears, the future we were slowly, carefully building together. The night he proposed was perfect in its simplicity. We were sitting by our favorite spot near the campus lake, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Adrian pulled out his grandmother's emerald ring, antique, elegant, full of history. His hands trembled as he slid it onto my finger. "Marry me, Marine," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "I want to spend my life making you happy." I said yes without a second thought. We were 22, and we truly believed love could overcome anything. We planned a small wedding after graduation, a honeymoon across Europe, a modest apartment where we would live while Adrian completed his MBA. The future felt limitless, because when you're young and in love, everything feels possible. But Adrian's parents had other ideas. Harold and Evelyn Cole were old Denver money, the kind of people who evaluated relationships based on social leverage and strategic advantage. When they discovered their son was engaged to a scholarship student from a middle-class family, their reaction was swift and merciless. They threatened to cut Adrian off entirely. No tuition support. No trust fund. No role in the family business empire built over generations. But that wasn't the worst of it. They also threatened me. They promised to dismantle my scholarship, my education, my future, everything I had worked endlessly to protect. Harold Cole had influence everywhere, including within the university administration. One word from him and I would lose it all. "They can't do this," Adrian said when he told me about their ultimatum. We were standing in his apartment, and his face was pale with fury. "I'll fight them, I'll walk away from the money, the business, everything. We'll make our own life." But there was something he didn't know. I was already carrying his child. I had found out 3 days earlier, sitting on the cold bathroom floor of my dorm room, staring at a plastic test strip with trembling hands. I was 22, terrified, and hopelessly in love with a man whose family would destroy us both rather than accept me. That night I made the hardest choice of my life. I ended things with Adrian, without ever telling him about the baby. I returned his grandmother's ring and walked away from everything we had planned. I told him we were too different, that I didn't want the future he envisioned for us. I watched his heart break in front of me. I saw the confusion, the pain, the disbelief in his eyes, and I nearly fell apart. But I stayed strong. I let him believe I had stopped loving him, because the truth would have destroyed us both. That his parents' threats had paralyzed me with fear. That I had been carrying his child. That I had given up our future to spare him from choosing between me and everything he had ever known. 3 weeks later, I lost the baby. The miscarriage came suddenly, at 8 weeks, leaving devastation in its wake. I bled alone in a hospital emergency room, mourning not only the child I would never hold, but the life that had already slipped through my fingers. Adrian tried to reach me during those weeks. He called, he showed up. But I couldn't face him. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that I had destroyed us for nothing, that the child we might have shared was gone. 6 months later, when Victor Hale asked me to marry him, I said yes. Victor was safe, predictable, the complete opposite of Adrian in every way that mattered. He wasn't the love of my life, but he offered stability and the promise of a fresh beginning. I convinced myself that love could grow with time, or at the very least, that I could learn to be satisfied with the life he proposed. I was wrong. I was wrong about many things. Victor revealed his control slowly, in ways that took years to fully recognize. It began with gentle suggestions, about my clothes, my friends, the way I spoke in public. Over time, those suggestions hardened into expectations, then into rules. He distanced me from my college friends. He persuaded me that my family didn't belong in his social world. He made me financially dependent on the small monthly allowance he provided. What I had mistaken for protection was, in truth, possession. For 25 years I lived as Victor's wife, performing the role he had carefully designed for me. I learned when to stay silent at dinner parties. I dressed according to what reflected well on him. I asked before spending money or making plans. I became a woman who apologized for taking up space. Yet through it all, I never forgot Adrian. I carried our love like a hidden wound, never visible, never healed. I kept his grandmother's emerald ring tucked away in my jewelry box, telling myself I would return it someday when the ache wasn't so sharp. I followed his career from afar, reading business headlines faithfully as he built his own empire without his parents' support. I celebrated his victories and quietly grieved his setbacks, always wondering if he ever thought of me. And now, sitting beside Victor as he ranted about the humiliation I had caused him, I clutched Adrian's business card and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Whatever strange twist of fate had brought Adrian back into my life, whatever cruel coincidence had made him the new CEO of Victor's most important client, it felt like a second chance I had never dared to imagine. That night in our bedroom, the business card burned in my hands as I stared at the simple white rectangle embossed in silver. Adrian Cole, Chief Executive Officer, Cole Industries. A phone number. An email address. 30 years of separation, reduced to a few quiet lines. Victor locked himself in his study after we returned from the gala. Through the thick walls, I could still hear his voice rising and falling as he spoke urgently to business partners, offering explanations soaked in panic. Everything had depended on that evening. Instead of securing a crucial contract, he had watched his wife's past collide violently with his present. I should have told him years ago. I should have mentioned, casually, over breakfast or during one of our silent dinners, that I had once loved a man named Adrian Cole. But how do you explain that you married one man while your heart never stopped belonging to another? How do you admit that 25 years of marriage were built on the ruins of a shattered love? I reached for the small wooden jewelry box hidden deep in the back of my closet, buried beneath winter sweaters Victor had never once noticed. My fingers closed around the familiar weight of the emerald ring Adrian had given me when we were 22 and still believed in forever. I had never returned it, though for years I told myself I would find a way. The truth was simpler and far more painful. It was the only piece of our love story I had been allowed to keep. The stone caught the light from the bedside lamp, scattering soft green reflections across my palm. It had belonged to Adrian's grandmother, passed down through 4 generations of Cole women. He had been so nervous the night he proposed. His hands trembled as he slipped the ring onto my finger beside the campus lake where we used to study together on warm afternoons. "It's been waiting for the right woman," he had said, his dark eyes steady and full of love. "It's been waiting for you." I wore it for exactly 3 months before everything unraveled. The memory of that afternoon in Harold Cole's office was still sharp enough to make my hands shake. Adrian's father had summoned me to the downtown Denver high-rise where Cole Industries was headquartered. I went there expecting to talk about wedding plans. Instead, I found myself seated across from a man whose icy stare and calculated smile made my skin crawl. "Miss Parker," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like a predator who already knew the outcome. "I understand my son has made you certain promises." I lifted my chin, trying to project confidence I didn't truly feel. At 22, I believed courage alone could overcome anything. "Adrian and I are engaged," I replied. "We're planning to marry after graduation." Harold Cole laughed, a hollow sound stripped of warmth. "Are you? How fascinating. Tell me, what do you imagine married life will look like?" He ticked it off effortlessly. Country club memberships, charity galas, summers in exclusive coastal homes. "Do you truly believe you'll fit into our world, Miss Parker?" "I think love matters more than social standing," I said, though my voice had begun to falter. "Love," he repeated slowly, as if the word itself offended him. "Let me explain something to you. Love is a luxury my family cannot afford." He leaned forward slightly. "Adrian has obligations to this company, to our family name, to a legacy spanning 4 generations. He will marry someone who strengthens those responsibilities, not someone who undermines them." I tried to respond, but he raised a hand, silencing me. "You're on a partial academic scholarship, aren't you?" he continued calmly. "Literature major, education minor, your father works in construction, your mother is an office secretary." Middle class, respectable, but not enough. I'm sure they're perfectly decent people, he added smoothly. But hardly the background we expect for a future Mrs. Cole. Each word was chosen with precision, and each one landed exactly where it was meant to. Shame and anger burned through me, but Harold Cole wasn't finished. I've done my research, Miss Parker, he said coolly. One phone call from me to the right people at Ridgeway University, and your scholarship disappears. Your grades are impressive, but there are many impressive students who need financial aid. Without that scholarship, Harold continued smoothly, you'll be forced to leave school, won't you? All those dreams of becoming a teacher, of building a life for yourself, gone. My mouth went completely dry. That scholarship was my lifeline. Without it, I would have to drop out, likely for good. My parents couldn't afford tuition, and I was already juggling 3 jobs just to survive. But that's not all, Harold added, his smile widening. Adrian believes he's ready to walk away from his trust fund for you. Very romantic, very naive. He leaned forward slightly. What he doesn't understand is that I can ensure he fails. Every word landed like a blow. Every opportunity he reaches for I can shut down, every job interview, every business loan. I have influence everywhere, Miss Parker. I can make sure Adrian Cole ends up as nothing more than a well-educated man with no future. I sat frozen, finally grasping the true extent of the Cole family's power. This wasn't merely about money or status. This was about total destruction. So here's what will happen, Harold said calmly, folding his hands on the polished mahogany desk. You will end things with my son. You will tell him you've realized you're incompatible, that you want different things from life. You will return his grandmother's ring, and you will walk away. He paused deliberately. In return, I'll ensure your scholarship remains intact. I might even recommend you to a few local school districts when you begin your teaching career. The offer was both generous and horrifying in its precision. He wasn't just buying my silence, he was offering the only path I had to finish my education and build a future. And if I refuse, I asked quietly, though I already knew. Then you'll both lose everything, he replied without hesitation. Adrian will never forgive himself for destroying your future, and you'll never forgive yourself for destroying his. Either way, your relationship won't survive. He leaned back. This way, at least one of you keeps their dreams. I should have told Adrian everything. I should have run straight to him and confessed what his father had threatened. But I was 22, terrified, and carrying a secret I hadn't told a single soul. I was pregnant with Adrian's child. I had discovered it 3 days before that meeting, sitting on the cold bathroom floor of my dorm room, staring at a plastic pregnancy test in my shaking hands. 2 pink lines. Everything changed. I had planned to tell Adrian that weekend. I imagined his face lighting up with disbelief and joy. We had talked about children, about the family we would build someday. That someday had arrived far sooner than expected. And we loved each other enough to face anything. Except Harold Cole's threats no longer endangered just us. They threatened our unborn child, the future we had already begun creating. If I defied him, Adrian's career would be destroyed, my education would vanish, and our baby would be born into hardship and uncertainty. So I made the decision that still haunts me. I chose to sacrifice our love to protect our child's future. The breakup was the most painful thing I had ever done. I met Adrian at our favorite coffee shop near campus, the place where we had spent countless hours studying side by side, dreaming aloud about the life we would one day share. He was already there when I arrived, seated at our usual table by the window. His face brightened the moment he saw me, just as it always did. There's my beautiful fiancé, Adrian said warmly, standing to kiss me. How did the meeting with my father go? I hope he wasn't too overwhelming. He can be intense when it comes to business. I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. Instead, my eyes dropped to the emerald ring on my left hand, the stone catching the afternoon sunlight pouring through the glass. We need to talk, Adrian. Something in my voice must have warned him, because his smile vanished instantly. What's wrong? I forced myself to look at him, at those dark eyes that had held nothing but love and tenderness for me over the past year. I've been thinking about our engagement, I said carefully, about what marriage would really mean for us. Okay, he replied, sitting down slowly. A trace of unease crossed his face. What about it? I don't think we're right for each other. The lie burned as it left my mouth. We want different things from life. Adrian stared at me in stunned silence, confusion and pain battling across his features. What are you saying, Marine? We've planned everything together. We want the same future. No, I said quietly, we don't. I slid the ring off my finger. It came away easily, probably because I'd barely been eating since learning I was pregnant. The emerald gleamed briefly before resting in my palm. I've realized I don't belong in your world, I continued. The country clubs, the expectations, the pressure to become someone I'm not, I want something simpler. Then we'll live simply, Adrian said immediately, reaching for my hands. I don't care about any of that. We can live however you want. I pulled my hands away before his touch could weaken my resolve. It's not just about how we live, I said. It's about who we are. One day you'll inherit your family's business. You'll need a wife who understands that world, someone who fits into it. I'm not her. You are, Adrian insisted, his voice rising with desperation. You're intelligent, kind, beautiful. You're everything I want in a partner. Marine, where is this coming from? Just last week we were excited about apartment hunting. Everything has changed. I wanted to scream the truth. That everything had changed when his father showed me exactly how much power his family held. When I realized love wouldn't protect the child growing inside me. Instead, I placed the emerald ring on the table between us. The soft click of metal against wood echoed loudly in the quiet cafe. I'm giving your ring back. Adrian stared at it as if it might bite him. No, Marine, this is insane. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We love each other. Love isn't always enough, I said softly, hatting myself for how true it sounded. It is for us, he said fiercely. It has to be. I stood up before I lost my courage completely. I'm sorry, Adrian, I truly am, but this is for the best. For the best, he rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. How is this for the best? Marine, talk to me. Tell me what's really happening. For one unbearable moment, I almost did. I almost told him about his father's threats. About the baby. About the impossible choice I was being forced to make. But Harold Cole's words echoed in my mind. Adrian would never forgive himself for destroying your future, and you would never forgive yourself for destroying his. Goodbye, Adrian, I whispered. And then I walked away from the only man I had ever truly loved. 3 weeks later, I lost the baby. I was alone when it happened, curled in my small dorm room on a rainy Thursday morning, racked with pain and bleeding. By the time I reached the campus health center, it was already over. 8 weeks of pregnancy ended as quietly and suddenly as it had begun. These things happen, the doctor told me gently. Especially in the first trimester. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you or that you won't have healthy pregnancies someday. But I knew the truth. I had given up my relationship with Adrian to protect a child who was already gone. I had shattered our love for nothing. Adrian tried to reach me during those weeks. He left messages I never answered. He showed up at places he knew I might be. I avoided him with the precision of someone whose heart was already broken beyond repair. Eventually, he stopped trying. Eventually, he graduated and moved away. And until tonight, I never saw him again. 6 months after our breakup, Victor Hale asked me to marry him. Victor was a business contact of my father's, 12 years older than me and nothing like Adrian in any way that mattered. He was dependable, predictable, safe. When I said yes, it wasn't because I loved him. It was because I was exhausted, tired of being alone with my grief, tired of removing Adrian's grandmother's ring from my finger every night before sleep. I believed I could grow to love Victor. I believed security and stability might be enough to build a life upon. I was wrong. I had been wrong about so many things. Now, 25 years later, I sat in the bedroom of the house Victor had purchased as proof of his success. In my hands were Adrian's business card and his grandmother's emerald ring. And I wondered if second chances were real, or merely cruel tricks the universe played on people who had already lost everything that mattered. The next day I would have to decide whether to call the number printed on that white card, whether to open a door I had slammed shut 3 decades ago, when I was young, pregnant, and terrified enough to believe love wasn't worth fighting for. The real question was whether I was brave enough now to learn what might have changed if I had chosen to fight instead of run. I spent 3 sleepless nights staring at Adrian's business card before I finally found the courage to dial. Each time I lifted the phone, Victor's voice echoed in my head, listing all the reasons I shouldn't do this, all the ways it could destroy the carefully constructed life we shared. But lying awake at 3 in the morning, I realized something. Carefully constructed was just another way of saying completely empty. On Thursday morning, Victor left early for a golf meeting with potential investors, desperate men like him, trying to rescue failing businesses with handshakes and hollow promises. I waited until I heard his car disappear down the driveway. Then I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking as I picked up the phone and dialed the number embossed in silver on that white card. Cole Industries, Mr. Cole's office. A professional female voice answered the line. I hesitated, realizing I didn't know how to introduce myself. I wasn't Adrian's college girlfriend anymore. I wasn't his lost love. I was Victor Hale's wife, calling a man who had declared his feelings for me in front of a ballroom filled with Denver's most powerful people. "This is Maureen Hale. Mr. Cole asked me to call." There was a brief pause, then the voice softened, warm and familiar. "Of course, Mrs. Hale. Mr. Cole has been expecting your call. Can you hold for just a moment?" The wait felt infinite. I gripped the phone until my knuckles went white, the strains of classical music filling my ears, reminding me of the concerts Adrian had once taken me to as a student. He had introduced me to Mozart and Beethoven, sitting beside me in the university auditorium, watching my face light up as I discovered the beauty of music I'd never experienced before. "Maureen," his voice came through the line, gentle and caressing, just as it used to be when we were alone in his apartment, wrapped in each other and talking about the future we had imagined together. "Thank you for calling," I admitted. "I almost didn't. I surprised myself with my honesty. I'm not sure this is wise." "Wisdom has nothing to do with it," Adrian said softly. "Some things are simply necessary. Can you meet me for coffee, somewhere we can talk without interruptions?" I understood immediately. Somewhere Victor couldn't find us, somewhere we wouldn't risk another scene like the gala. "There's a small cafe on 16th Street, the Blue Moon. Do you know it?" "I'll find it. Can you be there in an hour?" An hour, 60 minutes to decide if I was brave enough to see him again, to sit across from him and hear whatever he had to say. 60 minutes to choose between the life I knew and the possibility of something I thought was lost forever. "I'll be there," I said, and hung up before I could hesitate. The Blue Moon Cafe was tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, the kind of place where students and artists nursed single cups of coffee for hours while writing novels or studying. I had discovered it years ago during one of my rare solo excursions. I came here sometimes when Victor's control felt suffocating, when I needed to remind myself there was a world beyond our marble-floored house, a world where people laughed freely and talked about ideas instead of portfolios. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner, shadows from the exposed brick walls providing privacy. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon pastries, and the low hum of conversation wrapped me in a cocoon of anonymity. I ordered a latte I didn't want and watched the door, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. Adrian arrived exactly on time, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. In the daylight streaming through the windows, he looked different. Older, yes, but somehow more substantial. The boy I had loved had become a man who commanded attention without demanding it, wearing authority like a perfectly tailored suit. But when he smiled at me, truly smiled, the first time since the gala, I saw glimpses of the 22-year-old who had proposed to me by the campus lake. "You look beautiful," he said as he sat across from me. I felt heat rush to my cheeks. Victor hadn't called me beautiful in years. Pretty maybe when I dressed appropriately for a business function. Acceptable, presentable, never beautiful. "You look successful," I replied, deflecting the compliment because I no longer knew how to accept one. Adrian's smile softened, almost fadding. Success isn't the same as happiness, Marine. I learned that the hard way. A waitress appeared to take Adrian's order. Black coffee, he said, just the way he used to drink it in college. During those nights we stayed awake until dawn studying side by side. After she walked away, silence settled between us. Not an empty silence, but one heavy with 30 years of unanswered questions and words never spoken. "Why did you leave?" Adrian asked at last. His voice was calm but unflinching. "The real reason, not the story about us wanting different things. I never believed that, not for a single second. For 3 days I had practiced this moment in my mind, searching for a version of the truth that would explain without unraveling everything. But sitting across from him now, seeing the ache that still lived behind his dark eyes, I found I couldn't hold anything back. So I told him about his father's threats, about the meeting in that cold downtown office where Harold Cole had calmly explained exactly how he would ruin both our lives if I refused to walk away. I told him about the pregnancy I had hidden from everyone, about losing the baby 3 weeks after we broke up, about marrying Victor because I was exhausted from grieving alone. Adrian didn't interrupt once. His face grew paler with every word. When I finally stopped, he sat frozen, his hands clenched into fists on the small cafe table. "My father threatened you," he said slowly, his voice frighteningly quiet. "And you were pregnant with my child." I nodded, unable to speak. "Jesus Christ, Marine." He dragged both hands through his hair, the same gesture he used whenever he was overwhelmed. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me?" "Because I was 22 and terrified," I whispered. "Because your father convinced me that loving you would destroy us both. Because I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Adrian let out a bitter laugh, empty of humor. "You protected me by breaking my heart and vanishing. You protected me by letting me believe for 30 years that I wasn't enough for you to stay." The pain in his voice was unbearable. Without thinking, I reached across the table, laying my hand over his clenched fist. "I'm so sorry," I said softly. "I truly believed I was doing the right thing." He turned his hand over, threading his fingers through mine. His touch was warm, achingly familiar, even after 3 decades. "My father died 5 years ago," he said quietly. "I spent the last 15 years of his life trying to earn his approval, trying to prove I could build something without his influence. I never knew what he did to you, never knew about the threats." "It doesn't matter now," I said, though we both knew it wasn't true. "It matters to me," Adrian replied firmly. "It matters because you need to know I never stopped loving you, not when you left, not when you married Victor, not even when I married Catherine, because my parents said I needed a suitable wife for appearances." My breath caught. "I looked for you, Marine, for years. I hired investigators, chased leads that led nowhere. I never stopped believing I'd find you someday." My chest tightened at the quiet agony in his confession. "I divorced Catherine 3 years ago," he continued. "No children, no real love on either side. We both knew we'd married for the wrong reasons." He paused, then met my eyes. "And last month I finally found you. Your marriage records, your address. I planned to approach you carefully, professionally. I never imagined I'd walk into that gala and see you standing there like something pulled straight from a dream." The weight of his words settled between us, part promise, part warning, changing everything that came after. He had found me. He had been planning to reach out, searching for 30 years. The life I had built with Victor, the carefully maintained routines of our marriage, the safety I had thought I needed, all of it now felt as delicate as tissue paper. "What happens now?" I asked, though I was scared of the answer. Adrian's hand squeezed mine. "That depends on you. I know you're married. I know it's complicated. But Marine, I also know what we had was real. And I don't believe it ever truly died. Not for me, and I don't think it ever did for you either." He was right, we both knew it. Sitting across from him in that small cafe, the pull between us was just as strong as it had been when we were 22, believing love could overcome anything. But I wasn't 22 anymore. I was 57, married to a man who controlled every aspect of my life, who would never let me go willingly. "Victor will never grant me a divorce," I said softly. "Not willingly. He sees me as a possession, not a person. He depends on my compliance to maintain his image, especially now with his business struggling. Then don't ask his permission, Adrian said simply. Leave him, come work with me. I'll make sure you're protected, financially and legally. The offer hung in the air between us, both tempting and terrifying. A job with Adrian would give me independence, a way to support myself without relying on Victor's allowance. It would give me a reason to see Adrian every day, to rebuild whatever connection still existed between us. But it would also ignite war with Victor, who would see my employment with Adrian as ultimate betrayal. I need time to think, I said, though part of me wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to step out of that cafe and into a new life without looking back. Adrian nodded, as understanding as always. Take all the time you need. He reached into his pocket and handed me another business card. This one had his personal cell number written on the back. Don't disappear on me again, he said softly. Whatever you decide, don't vanish. I can't go through that a second time. I took the card, our fingers brushing once more. I won't disappear, I promised, and I meant it. We sat in quiet for a few more minutes, sipping coffee that had grown cold while we sifted through the ruins of our past. When Adrian finally stood, he leaned down and kissed my cheek gently, the same way he used to after late study sessions at the library when he would walk me back to my dorm. I'll be waiting, he whispered, for however long it takes. I watched him leave, this man who had loved me for 30 years without knowing why I had walked away. The cafe felt suddenly empty, as though all the light had left the room. I sat alone with my cold coffee, imagining what life might look like if I were brave enough to choose love over safety, possibility over routine. The drive home was a blur of Denver traffic and racing thoughts. I tucked Adrian's business card into my purse alongside the first one he had given me at the gala. I could feel them there, like a secret heartbeat. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had almost convinced myself I could do it. I could tell Victor I was leaving. I could accept a job with Adrian. Our marriage could finally be over. But Victor was waiting in the kitchen when I walked through the door. And one look at his face told me that the choice I thought I was making might not be mine at all. Where have you been? Victor demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion and barely restrained anger. I went out for coffee, I said carefully, hanging my purse on the hook by the door and forcing a calm I didn't feel. I just needed some air, time to myself. Coffee, Victor repeated as if the word itself offended him. For 3 hours. I froze. I hadn't realized how long I'd been gone. Time had slipped away while I'd been digging through 30 years of buried emotions, trying to understand the decisions that had shaped my entire life. I ran a few errands afterward, I said smoothly. Groceries, dry cleaning, normal things. Victor stepped closer, his grey eyes scanning my face, searching for cracks in the lie. Groceries, he said slowly. Then where are they? My stomach dropped. I had driven straight home, my mind still wrapped around Adrian, his voice, his eyes, the impossible offer he had placed in front of me. I forgot, I admitted. I was distracted, thinking about other things. What other things? His voice dropped, dangerously calm, the tone he used when he was barely containing himself. What could possibly matter more than the one thing you said you were leaving the house to do? I felt the walls closing in. I could almost see his suspicion hardening into something darker. Victor had always been possessive, always jealous, but what happened at the gala had awakened something far uglier. He felt his control slipping, and a man like Victor Hale did not relinquish control without a fight. Nothing important, I said softly, hatting the familiar surrender in my own voice. I'm sorry, I'll go back out and get them now. No. He grabbed my arm, his fingers clamping down hard enough to make me gasp. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not today, not tomorrow, not until I figure out what the hell is going on between you and Adrian Cole. For a moment, we stood locked in place in the marble-floored kitchen, the house Victor had bought to display his success. I saw my reflection in his eyes, and it wasn't a wife or a partner staring back at me. It was property. Property that had dared to think for itself. And Victor Hale had never tolerated defiance. That was the moment everything became clear. Choosing Adrian was no longer just about love or second chances or healing old wounds. It was about survival. Because staying with Victor would slowly suffocate every part of me that was still alive, and I had already given him 25 years. His grip tightened until I winced, and something flickered across his face. Satisfaction. I had seen it before, though I'd always told myself I was imagining it. Victor took pleasure in my discomfort, in my obedience, in the subtle ways he could remind me who held the power. Let go of me, I said quietly, testing rebellion for the first time in decades. And if I do, his smile was cold, almost amused. What will you do? Call your boyfriend? Run to Adrian Cole and cry about how badly your husband is treating you? The mockery in his voice was meant to shrink me, to make my feelings sound childish and absurd, as if the life I'd buried for 30 years was nothing more than a foolish fantasy. It was a technique Victor had perfected over the years, diminish control, but something inside me had shifted since sitting across from Adrian in that cafe, since learning the truth about why our love had been torn apart. Let go of me, I said again, and this time my voice didn't shake. Victor studied my face for a long moment, as if searching for the obedient woman he had trained me to be. Then he released my arm with a sharp shove that made me stumble backward. You think you're in love, he sneered, years old and acting like a teenager with her first crush. He shook his head in disgust. It's pathetic, Maureen, truly pathetic. I rubbed the angry red marks already forming on my arm, marks that would darken into bruises by morning. What's pathetic, I said, the words spilling out before fear could stop them, is a man who has to hurt his wife to feel powerful. The kitchen went deadly quiet. Victor's face drained of colour, then flushed with a rage I had never seen so naked before. In 25 years of marriage, I had never spoken to him like that, never challenged him so directly. We both knew something irreversible had cracked open. You want to talk about pathetic, Victor said slowly, his voice low and venomous. Let me tell you what's really pathetic. He smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Adrian Cole spent 30 years looking for you, 30 years hiring private investigators, following dead ends, chasing ghosts. My breath caught. And do you know the best part? He continued smoothly. I knew where you were the entire time. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. What? I whispered. Victor laughed, cold and humorless. Oh yes, I knew he was searching. I knew about the inquiries, the background checks, the quiet phone calls. He adjusted his tie, the familiar gesture he used when he believed he was in control, though his eyes remained sharp and predatory. I made sure every trail went cold, every lead ended in nothing. I protected you from him, Maureen. I kept him away from our marriage, from our life. I stared at him, realization crashing over me in waves so violent I had to grip the kitchen counter to stay upright. You knew, my voice broke. You knew he was looking for me. Of course I did, Victor said dismissively. Adrian Cole isn't subtle, and money talks. His investigators were easy to spot. My knees felt weak. The first inquiry came about 6 months after we married, he continued casually. Some detective asking questions about you. It didn't take much effort to shut that down. You never told me, I said, barely able to breathe. Why would I? Victor scoffed. So you could go running back to your college sweetheart, so you could destroy our marriage for some romantic illusion. He spread his hands as if explaining something obvious. I protected us. I protected you from making a catastrophic mistake. No, I said, the truth finally crystallizing. You protected yourself. His eyes flickered. You knew that if Adrian found me, if he told me the truth about why we broke up, I would leave you. Victor's smile sharpened, thin as a knife. And would you have, he asked softly, if Adrian had shown up 10 years ago, 20 years ago, would you really have walked away from me? The answer lived between us, unspoken but undeniable. Yes. Even during the loneliest years of my marriage, even when I had convinced myself that numbness was the same as peace, I would have left Victor without hesitation if Adrian had stood in front of me and asked. Victor had known that. And he had built my prison around my ignorance. How, I asked, my voice barely audible, how did you stop them? Victor exhaled slowly as if bored by the question. Money mostly, bribes, false trails, dead ends. It's remarkable what people are willing to do when the price is right. He reached for the bottle of scotch on the kitchen counter and poured himself a drink, his movements relaxed, almost careless, like we were discussing business over dinner instead of 3 decades of calculated deceit. I had connections too, Marine, he continued calmly. Business associates, people who owed me favors, men who knew how to make inconvenient problems vanish. My stomach churned as I thought of Adrian sitting across from me in that cafe, explaining how he had searched for years, how he never stopped believing I was out there, how every lead dissolved into nothing. You ruined his life, I said slowly, horror spreading through me. You didn't just keep him away from me. You tortured him for 30 years. You made him believe I didn't want to be found. I saved him, Victor corrected coldly. Adrian Cole was obsessed with you, completely, if I hadn't stepped in. He would have wasted his entire future chasing a woman who had already moved on, a woman who had chosen another life. I never chose you, I said, the truth finally spilling free. I settled for you. I married you because I was broken and alone and convinced myself I didn't deserve more, but I never chose you, not truly. For the first time that night, Victor looked something other than furious or calculating. He looked hurt. 25 years, he said quietly. 25 years of providing for you, protecting you, giving you everything you needed, and this is what I get, contempt. You call it providing, I replied, my voice growing steadier. I call it purchasing obedience. You gave me a house, an allowance, a script to follow, but you never gave me freedom, you never gave me choice, you never even gave me honesty. Honesty? Victor laughed sharply. You want honesty? Fine, here it is. Adrian Cole doesn't love you, Marine, he loves a memory. A fantasy of the girl you were at 22. He's been chasing a ghost for 30 years, and when he realizes you're not that girl anymore, he'll disappear just as quickly as he showed up. The words were meant to break me, to plant doubt, to make me small again. Instead, they clarified everything. You're wrong, I said simply. Victor's eyebrow arched. Am I? Let me ask you something. When Adrian finally sees you clearly, when he notices how you've changed, how you've aged, how you've become exactly the kind of middle-aged woman he never would have chosen back then, do you honestly believe he'll still want you? I looked at him, this man who had spent 25 years dismantling my confidence piece by piece. And something inside me finally snapped. You know what, Victor? I said calmly. I don't care if Adrian wants me or not. I don't care if he changes his mind tomorrow, because at least he gave me something you never did. I reached into my purse and placed both of Adrian's business cards on the kitchen counter between us. He gave me a choice. Victor stared at them. He offered me a job, I continued, financial independence, a chance to build a life that belongs to me, not to a man who believes ownership and marriage are the same thing. Victor's face went completely still. You are not taking that job, he said flatly. Yes, I replied, meeting his gaze, I am. No, Marine, he said, his voice dropping into that dangerous, measured tone I knew too well. You're not. Because if you try to leave me, Victor said coldly, if you even attempt to work for Adrian Cole or anyone else, I will destroy you financially. I'll make sure you walk away with nothing in the divorce. I'll bury you in court for years. I'll drag it out until you're too old, too exhausted, and too broke to ever start over. There it was. The naked truth of our marriage. Not love. Not partnership. Not even affection. Just ownership, enforced by the threat of financial annihilation. Victor Hale had never loved me. He had acquired me the same way he acquired rare paintings and vintage wine, as proof of success, as something to display. You can try, I said, surprised by the calm in my voice, but Adrian has more money and better lawyers than you ever will, and unlike you, he doesn't need to destroy people to feel powerful. The mention of Adrian's resources struck Victor like a blow. His face flushed deep red, the vein at his temple pulsing violently. Victor Hale hated being reminded that he was new money, that his status was built on leverage, debt, and fragile deals. Adrian represented everything Victor would never be: inherited influence, quiet authority, success that didn't require intimidation. Get out of my house, Victor snapped at last, his voice trembling with barely restrained fury. Gladly, I replied, turning toward the staircase. You'll be back, Victor called after me, his voice echoing through the marble halls of the house that had never once felt like home. When you realize Adrian doesn't want a 57-year-old housewife, when you figure out you can't survive without someone taking care of you, you'll come crawling back, And maybe, if you beg, I'll consider taking you. I stopped halfway up the stairs and looked down at him, at the man who had isolated me from everyone I loved, who had lied to me for decades about Adrian's search, who truly believed I was too broken to exist without his control. No, Victor, I said quietly, I won't be back, because no matter what happens with Adrian, with the job, with the future, I finally understand something. I met his gaze without fear. I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than spend one more day with someone who sees me as property instead of a person. I continued upstairs and began packing. Behind me I could hear Victor already on the phone, his voice sharp, rising and falling in furious explanations, calling lawyers, business managers, the men who helped him preserve the illusion of power. But for the first time in 25 years, his voice no longer ruled me. It was just background noise. Something temporary. Something already fading. I had a call to make. A job to accept. A life to reclaim. And it began now. I called Adrian from my car in the parking lot of a downtown hotel, my hands still trembling from the confrontation. The sun was setting over the Denver skyline, the mountains glowing gold and violet, just like the evenings we used to spend studying on campus, when the future felt endless and love felt invincible. Marine, Adrian answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting. Are you okay? You sound shaken. I'm leaving him, I said without hesitation. Victor, I'm leaving tonight. I inhaled slowly. And I want to accept your job offer. There was a brief pause on the line, then Adrian's voice came through, steady and reassuring. Where are you? The Marriott downtown, I said. I couldn't think of anywhere else. Stay there, he replied without hesitation. I'm on my way. 20 minutes later, I watched through the glass walls of the hotel lobby as Adrian's black BMW pulled up to the valet stand. He stepped out wearing jeans and a simple grey sweater, looking far less like the powerful CEO who ruled boardrooms and far more like the young man I had fallen in love with years ago. When his eyes found me sitting in one of the leather chairs, his expression softened instantly, relief, concern, and something unmistakable beneath it. Hope. He crossed the lobby quickly and sat beside me. Are you hurt? His gaze dropped to my arm, to the darkening bruises where Victor had grabbed me. His jaw tightened. Did he touch you? Nothing I can't handle, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Victor's cruelty had always been emotional. The physical violence felt like an inevitable escalation rather than a sudden shock. Adrian reached out carefully, his fingers barely brushing my forearm as he examined the marks. No one ever has the right to put their hands on you, he said quietly. No one, ever. The gentleness in his voice, the way he treated the bruises as if they were something precious and painful, made my eyes burn. I had forgotten what it felt like to have my pain taken seriously, to be met with care instead of dismissal. Tell me what happened, Adrian said. So I did. I told him everything, Victor's confession, how he had known about Adrian's search for 30 years, how he had sabotaged every investigator, every lead, every possibility of reunion. I told him about the threats, the manipulation, the years stolen from both of us. Adrian listened in stunned silence, his hands slowly curling into fists. 30 years, he said finally, his voice rough. 30 years of wondering whether you ever thought of me, whether you ever regretted leaving. 30 years of believing I hadn't fought hard enough, that maybe you had stopped loving me. I never stopped, I said immediately. Not for a single day. I married Victor because I was broken and alone, but I carried you with me the entire time. Adrian turned fully toward me, his eyes searching my face. And now, he asked softly, after everything, after all this time, what do you want now, Marine? The question settled deep in my chest. I want to know who I am when I'm not afraid, I said truthfully. I want to see what my life looks like when I'm making my own choices, and I want to know whether what we had was real enough to survive everything that tried to destroy it. Adrian smiled then, the first true unguarded smile I'd seen since the night of the gala. Then let's find out, he said. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Blackwood Industries as the new director of community relations, a role Adrian had designed specifically for me. The position would use my background in literature and education to build partnerships with local schools, libraries, and literacy programs. It was meaningful work, purposeful, the kind of job I had once dreamed of before fear had narrowed my world. The salary alone felt unreal. $2,500 a week, Adrian had said over dinner the night before, plus benefits, paid vacation, and complete autonomy over your department. Then he had looked at me seriously. I want you financially independent, mean. I never want you to depend on anyone's permission or generosity again. As I stood in that office, holding my new ID badge, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my bones. Stability, dignity, possibility. And for the first time in decades, the future felt like something I was allowed to imagine again. The documents lay on Julian's desk, crisp and ominous, each page a revelation that made my stomach churn. Money laundering, shell companies, offshore accounts, hidden liabilities. Fletcher's entire empire, built on the illusion of success, was rotten from the inside out. How could I not have seen this? I whispered, more to myself than to Julian. 25 years and I thought I knew him. You didn't, Julian said quietly, but there was no judgment in his tone, only the quiet certainty of someone who had seen the truth for what it was. Victor Morrison was never the man you married. He built a life around control, manipulation, and appearances, and now the law is finally catching up to him. I swallowed hard, the weight of both my past and present pressing down on me. So, what does this mean, for me, for the divorce? Julian leaned back, steepling his fingers. It means you're not as trapped as he thinks. You've got leverage now. Fletcher can threaten all he wants, but if these allegations hold, and they will, you have options he can't touch. Your access to assets, your ability to live independently, even the timing of the divorce, it all shifts in your favor. Relief and fear collided inside me. After decades of being controlled, of being told what I could and couldn't do, of being isolated and silenced, suddenly there was a path that didn't depend on begging for permission. But this won't be easy, Julian continued, his dark eyes locking onto mine. Fletcher is desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. He will fight tooth and nail to maintain control, to protect himself, and he won't stop until he's cornered. You need to be ready. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. I had spent so long afraid, so long obeying, that it almost felt foreign to take decisive action. But this was different. This was survival, reclaiming my life and finally choosing myself. And, Julian added, you won't be doing it alone. My team and I will make sure you're protected, legally, financially, emotionally. We'll handle the threats so you can focus on moving forward. I let the words sink in. For the first time in decades, I felt a sense of agency, a sense that I wasn't just a passive player in Fletcher Morrison's narrative. I was writing my own story now. I looked at Julian and something deeper than gratitude or relief welled up inside me. Trust, safety, and maybe after all these years, the possibility of love that didn't come with a price. I'm ready, I said finally, whatever it takes. Julian reached across the desk, placing his hand over mine. Warm, steady, real. Then let's start taking back everything he's tried to steal from you, starting now. The first step toward freedom felt terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't running from the past. I was stepping into a future that I could finally claim as my own. The woman looking back at me from the mirror was older than the girl who had once stood in a dorm bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test with terror in her heart. But she was also stronger, clearer, and infinitely more alive. Fine lines traced the corners of my eyes. My hair, once dark, was threaded with silver, but my posture was different. I stood like someone who no longer expected to be struck for speaking, like someone who trusted the ground beneath her feet. The dress was intentionally simple. No heavy beading, no dramatic train, no performance of wealth or status. I had worn enough costumes in my life. Today I wanted to be unmistakably myself. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," I said. Julian's daughter, Emma, stepped inside, her smile warm and unmistakably sincere. 30 years ago, the idea that Julian would have a daughter I'd never known would have broken me. Today it felt like grace, proof that life had continued even while we were apart. "You look beautiful," she said, her voice gentle, not in a bridal magazine way, in a peaceful way. I laughed softly. That might be the best compliment I've ever received. She hesitated, then reached into her clutch and held out a small velvet box. My grandmother wanted you to have this today. She said it was always meant for you. My breath caught as I opened it. Julian's grandmother's ring, polished, restored, the emerald glowing like it held decades of patience inside it. She kept it, I whispered. She said love that real doesn't expire, Emma replied. It just waits. When she left, I sat alone for a moment, holding the ring between my fingers, remembering the girl I had been when I first wore it. I had thought love was fragile then, something that could be lost forever with one wrong choice. I knew better now. A quiet chime sounded, signaling it was time. The ceremony was held on a terrace overlooking the mountains, the late afternoon sun casting everything in warm gold. No grand guest list, no business associates, just a small circle of people who knew our story, or at least honored its weight. When I stepped outside and saw Julian waiting for me, something settled inside my chest, something that had been restless for most of my adult life. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't performing, he just looked steady, present, as if this moment wasn't an escape or a victory but a homecoming. When I reached him, he took my hands and whispered, "You're here." "Yes," I said, "and I'm not afraid." The vows were simple, no promises of perfection, no illusions about time or age or erased pain. "I choose you," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because you complete me, but because you stand beside me as my equal. I choose the woman you are now and every version you've survived to become." When it was my turn, I didn't look at the guests or the mountains or the sky. I looked only at him. "I spent most of my life believing safety was the same thing as love," I said. "I was wrong. Love is choice. Love is truth. Love is the courage to stay present, even when it would be easier to run. I choose you, Julian, not as a second chance, but as the right one, finally taken." When he slipped the ring onto my finger, it fit perfectly. It always had. Later, as twilight deepened, and the city lights flickered on below us, Julian wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "No regrets?" he asked softly. I leaned into him, listening to a life that felt quiet instead of controlled, open instead of confined. "Only one," I said, "that I waited so long to believe I deserved this." Julian kissed my temple. "You arrived exactly when you were ready." And for the first time, truly, unmistakably, the future didn't feel like something to fear or endure. It felt like something to live. Julian took a step back, letting me admire the ring on my hand, letting me breathe in the moment without rushing it. The sunlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows made the emerald glow like it held every memory we'd ever shared, the laughter, the heartbreak, the long, lonely years of waiting. "You've waited long enough," he said, his voice steady, full of warmth and quiet pride. "And I've waited too. Not a day passed when I didn't think about you, mourn, about us." I smiled, feeling the tension I'd carried for decades finally begin to melt. "I never stopped loving you either," I whispered, the words lighter than I had imagined they could be, yet heavy with all the years of loss and longing. Margaret stepped back, giving us space, but her eyes glistened with tears as she said softly, "It's about time, really." Julian slipped his hand into mine, fingers entwining naturally, a gesture that carried 30 years of patience and devotion. We walked together toward the terrace, the sound of the city below fading into a distant hum. The ceremony was simple, intimate, and filled with meaning. No grand gestures, no show of wealth or status, just a few close friends, a soft breeze, and the mountains in the distance. When we exchanged vows, it wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it, honoring it, and choosing each other again in the present. "I choose you," Julian said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Not for who you were, not for who I imagined you to be, but for the woman you've become, for the courage, the heart, and the life you've built despite everything." "And I choose you," I replied, my voice steady, the emerald ring a pulse against my skin. "For the love that survived time, for the hope that never died, and for the promise that we can still write our story together, this time on our terms." When Julian slipped his wedding band onto my finger, it fit perfectly, as if time itself had been holding it for this moment. I looked at him and realized that 30 years of waiting, of pain and longing, had all led to this. Not just a reunion, but a true beginning. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and purple, I leaned into Julian's shoulder. No regrets, no fear, only the quiet, unshakable knowledge that we had finally come home to each other. Margaret, wiping the last tears from her eyes, whispered, "Finally." "Yes," I said softly, pressing my hand against Julian's. "Finally, we are free. Finally, we have us." Julian squeezed my hands gently, his dark eyes glistening. "And I promise to spend the rest of my life making up for every day we were apart, to love you, to support you, to honor the woman you've become, strong, wise, and unafraid." The officiant nodded, a quiet smile on his face, as if he recognized that this wasn't just a ceremony, it was a reclamation of a life stolen by fear and circumstance. We exchanged rings, simple bands that symbolized the endurance of love rather than the trappings of wealth or status. As I slid Julian's ring onto my finger, it fit perfectly, just as the emerald had, and I felt the weight of all those lost years transform into something light, something freeing. Every moment of heartache, every secret kept, every forced compromise now felt like a step toward this one perfect day. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Julian lifted me gently, and we shared a kiss that was both a promise and a celebration. Laughter and applause erupted around us, but all I could feel was the steady beat of his heart against mine, and the certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be. As we walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, I realized that the rest of our lives weren't about recapturing the past, they were about building a future we had finally earned. And this time, every choice, every step, and every moment would be ours. The mountains glowed in the late afternoon sun, the rose petals scattered along the path a reminder that even after decades of waiting, beauty could bloom again, and love could endure anything. We had waited 30 years, but now, finally, we were home. I rested my head against Julian's shoulder, feeling the warmth and steadiness that had always been his anchor. "We really made it back to each other," I whispered, the words trembling with emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. "Yes, Julian replied softly, his arm tightening around me. "And this time nothing, no threats, no lies, no fear can take us apart, not ever again." I closed my eyes, letting the breeze carry away years of regret, guilt, and heartbreak. The mountains stood silent and eternal before us, the stars shimmering like the promises we had made and finally kept. It was a profound kind of freedom, one I had almost given up hope of ever experiencing. Julian kissed the top of my head, his lips lingering, and I felt a deep sense of peace settle into my bones. We had survived manipulation, loss, and decades of separation. We had endured heartbreak, betrayal, and fear. And now, with the city twinkling beneath us and the mountains standing witness, we could simply be together, free, whole, and chosen by one another, just as we had always been meant to be. The quiet laughter of our friends and colleagues drifted up from the ballroom below, a soft reminder that love, when patient and true, eventually finds its way home. Julian and I stayed there for a long time, holding each other, knowing that everything we had lost had led us exactly to this moment. And for the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to imagine a life where joy, not fear, would be the foundation of every day we shared. I smiled softly as I finished reading your story. What a journey, heartbreaking, infuriating, and ultimately triumphant. If I were in your place, I think I'd hope I could find even a fraction of the courage you did, the courage to stand up to manipulation, reclaim my life, and choose love and authenticity over safety and obligation. It takes a rare kind of strength to say, I deserve to live my life on my terms, especially after decades of being told otherwise. I haven't lived through exactly what you did, but your story reminded me, and anyone listening, how often people settle for what's safe instead of what's right for their hearts, and how life sometimes gives us a second chance to rewrite our own endings. That moment of reclaiming agency, even after 30 years, is inspiring beyond words. It's a story about patience, resilience, and the idea that love, true love, can endure even the cruelest obstacles and the longest separation. I'd imagine most people would sit with your story for a while, reflecting on the choices they've made and the courage it takes to fight for the life they truly want. You've not just told a love story, you've shown the triumph of self-worth, and that's something rare and powerful. If this were a discussion with readers or viewers, I'd encourage them, don't wait for the perfect time or for circumstances to be ideal. Sometimes the right moment is the one you make brave enough to step into. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Justice After Dark for more incredible stories. See you in the next one.